Hello, I'm Will Yeoman. I'm CEO of Writing WA, and welcome to another episode of Pod Street, Writing WA's official writing podcast. And today it's my great pleasure to introduce author and poet Alan Fyfe. Alan, welcome to Pod Street.
Hey, Will, thanks so much for having me on.
You look brilliant. So we're here to talk a little bit about T, which is your novel, which came out last year, I believe. But also you've got something coming out in the near future, and we'll talk as much or as little as you're allowed to about that, but that is poetry, we can say that much, and you are a poet. So that'll be great to talk about. But first of all, T, I mean, it's actually difficult to talk about that book in so many ways. The extraordinary range of characters, the relationship between drugs and the artistic process,
Sure.
and I guess that kind of lifestyle which a lot of people in Western Australia probably, it's fair to say, aren't exposed to. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. So I guess the first most obvious question is how much of it is related to your own experience, and how much, without incriminating yourself, of course.
It's fine to incriminate myself. Look, I've been honest about this the whole way through. When the novel was first shortlisted for a manuscript award, it was a T.A.G Hungerford way back in 2018. I went on a radio interview with Radio Fremantle and I lied basically. I said I'd never taken drugs. That was a lie. It's a self-protective thing.
Of course.
I was moving away from my home in the Peel region and into a new crowd of literature, and it's a very, suppose you're aware, bourgeois middle-class crowd where, as you say, a lot of people haven't experienced that side of life. I have experienced that side of life. So, look, it's not autobiographical. One of the things about the book is it's magical realism. I've never literally seen anybody falling out of the sky, and obviously the main character is a 23-year-old man with long hair. I'm obviously not that.
Timothy, yes.
Timothy, yeah, T. He has various names through the text. He sort of exists as Timmy in my brain.
Yes.
I have taken crystal methamphetamine in the ways described in the book. Something I haven't done for a long time now.
Very pleased to hear that.
and I'm pleased to be living that clean experience.
Yeah, look, and I guess it's an obvious question because it seemed to me that how could you be able to describe it in the way you do without having experienced it?
Yeah, well, that was the kind of the troubling thing about lying about it.
Yes,
was that I was posing as this sort of disengaged observer, and that was people I knew. But one thing is, I realised anybody who got 15 pages into it would realise I understood the mechanics of a meth pipe. And the other thing was, I really strongly feel your work should stand for something. I don't think it's always, an important social issue that it should stand for. Maybe you're just trying to entertain people, but at least it should stand for that. At least you shouldn't be inauthentic about these things. You shouldn't disengage yourself from the work to that degree that you say, oh, it just came out of me. I don't know what happened. You know that line in Trove, like the Old Testament, when Moses accuses his brother of making the golden calf, and his brother says, oh, we just put some gold in the fire and this came out. That's sort of passive speech. I made this idol myself, and I take responsibility for that. Taking responsibility for that means taking responsibility for the kind of people that I'm talking about.
Yes.
And when you say people haven't experienced it, like a lot of people have. WA runs around about twice the national rate of meth use.
That is very true.
In terms of socioeconomics, we have statistical studies from Melbourne University recently. ASA have commissioned some studies about class and ethnicity in writing. And we see the vast majority of people in writing, publishing professionals and so forth, come from wealthy backgrounds. So this world that I move in now, a lot of people haven't experienced it, but on the other side, there's a great percentage, maybe even the majority, of Australians who are maybe not experienced that directly meth use, but are close enough to it
Sure.
for that to resonate. It's always been a weird issue to me that
Yeah.
my book costs $30, but the people I wrote it about wouldn't really think of spending that on a new book.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's where I was coming from. This idea about who's actually reading the book. But look, I wanted to talk about the characters too. There's
Sure.
a fantastic range of characters. You know, you've got Gulp, you've got Cardo, you've got Laurie Bird. I mean, where did they come from? Are they even loosely based on people you've known, or are they amalgams of, you know, many people sort of condensed down into these amazing characters?
Yeah, sure. I guess amalgams. You know, that's the point of creative writing. I mean, you can write biography, I suppose, autobiography, creative non-fiction, that kind of thing, which is an interesting form of writing and a valid form of writing. But I like to write fiction. I got into Salman Rushdie as a teenager and fell in love with magic realism. And I just like that imaginative space. So, yeah, mostly it comes from imagination. It comes from creative writing practice, of course, what we would call poetics. I think there's a big connection between prose fiction writing and poetry writing.
Absolutely.
I don't necessarily see them as a different thing. You know, the Iliad's kind of novelistic. Back in the day, nobody thought they were working in different departments.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I was talking to Rose Van Son the other day, the poet, and she said, when she writes an essay, that's poetry too. And I said, well, that's right. You know, there's verse and there's prose. It's not poetry and fiction, because fiction is poetic.
Yeah, a structured and intentional poetics.
Exactly right. Yeah, I agree.
Although I've got to say, Rose did get angry at me for writing a prose fiction first instead of a poetry book. I told her that less people pay attention to poetry, so it made it kind of easier to publish the poetry book.
Of course.
Publishing a prose fiction first.
Yeah. But while we're on the subject then, in terms of your poetics in the way that most people would understand poetry, you've already explained how you see it as all of a piece, in a sense, no matter how you're writing. But and again, T is very, I think lyrical's the right word. The writing is lyrical as well as poetic. And that's beautiful, because to be lyrical about such subject matter is not an easy thing. I mean, you might go back to, I don't know, even if you look at the painters, the Impressionists who started painting daily life rather than these grand historical subjects. Yeah. That's what it reminds me of. You still treat it beautifully, don't you? It deserves to be treated beautifully. And I think you've succeeded. So tell me more about why style is important to you, why poetry is important to you.
Okay. So, I'd go back to like a book. I'm going to pronounce something incorrectly here, which is most embarrassing. Bakhtin or Bakhtinin, Mikhail Bakhtinin. The Problems of Poetics in Dostoevsky.
Yes.
Where he identifies one of Dostoevsky's poetic techniques as polyphony. The variance of voices which produces its own kind of truth.
Exactly.
So understanding fiction that way through a poetics you could use in much the same way you would use, say, a structure of a poem. The Volta in a sonnet, for example, is supposed to do something. It's supposed to turn the theme. It's a literal effect that you want to have on the reader. Understanding that this existed in prose fiction, those kind of structural and poetic moves, was a huge thing for me. As a result of many years of study post-undergrad, I sort of secluded myself in a house by the river in Mandurah, which, if you've read the novel, you'll be familiar with those kind of shacks by the river.
Indeed.
The shack I lived in does not appear in the novel, but many similar ones do.
Yes.
And practiced. I sort of idolised Emily Dickinson and the idea of the loneliness of practice and reading constantly, learning technique constantly. And I was there for 7 years. I gave up television during that time.
Good on you.
Yeah, and just practiced writing, basically. So coming into writing my first novel with that kind of intentionality, I don't really know how everybody goes about it. Of course, I've read a lot of author statements on how they went about it, but I tend to think they're a little bit false because we all kind of make up after the fact. Because we're faced with things like these podcasts or interviews and we have to say something about how it happened. And, oh, God, I was walking in the park and I had this idea. But it's not really like that. For me, what it was like was the imaginative ideas for a story, the things that come out of dreams, the things that come out of just flashes of imagination, the sort of ideas you have maybe when you're driving, can all be wrestled into a structure like a poem. That was what the origin of it was. That was what prepared me to be able to do it. And then my writing started to be getting taken seriously by journals and so forth, and I moved up to Perth and in with my partner here. I was away from that life. I had not only given up my former life of taking hard drugs, I had given up the place where I lived, and that kind of exile feeling that they say people have when they move away from their home made me concentrate and sit down and actually do it.
And this idea of essentially exchanging one drug for another, because your drug is now poetry, presumably.
My drug was always poetry.
Oh, well, okay, so you had two going at the same time then.
Yeah. The other stuff was just an additional bonus feature
yes. No, that's
of my life, and born out of a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you read the novel, the point of treating characters so carefully is to give the reader a sense of reasons. And while we might not always have access to the reasons, I mean, dumping a whole lot of exposition in there about every single character is just bad writing.
No, completely,
yeah.
Exactly.
But then we do want the sense that these characters have childhoods, they have past, they have places where they've come from. Treating those characters with respect was treating the people who actually suffer through these economic hardships primarily. That's where Matthews is concentrated.
Yes.
Was a way of not exactly getting the readers to empathise with the characters. I mean, you would have read the characters do some terrible things, which I wouldn't excuse. But to give a reader a sense that there was a rationality about how they had ended up.
Trying to understand the motivations, and certainly without necessarily agreeing with those motivations either, let alone the actions.
Yeah.
Look, it's a tricky thing. So you've done really well. And I love that idea
you.
of polyphony too, because again, that's multiple voices. That's what it means, and how you make that textured web into something that's more cohesive is not an easy thing.
It's not an easy thing, and I hope the finished product, the readers don't realise when they're actually immersed in the moment that several of these characters are representing different philosophical standpoints. I hope that it comes out naturally to them.
Well, it must, because you don't want them to be too self-conscious. You don't want the reader to be taken out of the experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so there's the balance between structure and poetics, and that divine spark of imagination, which we can't really explain, and we can't really talk about the origins
and you can't control, or you can't sum it up, like some kind of daemon or something. I mean, so look, it's interesting. It's just quickly going back to Rose, only because she was my last subject. I asked her about, because she said something which a lot of writers say, I only write for myself. And I get that, but surely there's a part of you that thinks, I'm writing for someone else. If I want to communicate with them, I need to keep them in mind to some extent. So it's not just about you all the time. Where do you sit on that continuum?
I knew if this got published that people in my hometown would read it.
Yes.
I knew that some of them would be annoyed that I had presented Mandurah like that. I knew some of them would be delighted.
Yes.
But if I say I thought about a reader, I thought about them as readers.
Yes.
And it became very important to me that the people alongside me who had lived that experience would appreciate it. I think you can go too far in trying to please a reader.
Absolutely.
It's often something publishers hide behind. A reader might feel this or that, and I tend to think when a publisher says that to me, well, no, say that you think this or that. Again, they're putting their own authenticity aside for some imagined reader who may or may not exist.
Yeah.
You know, admit it's your own taste. So to that degree, I do write to my own tastes. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written a magical realism novel. As I've said, it is very much my own taste. And I like to write fiction. It's a great imaginative space. So that I'm doing for myself. But yeah, of course, you don't publish without it being for somebody else, without hoping somebody thinks something about it.
Yeah.
That it causes some reaction, whether that reaction is throwing the book down in anger, which isn't such a bad result.
You want some kind of response, don't you?
Yeah, you want to do something to people.
And you're right, it's not about trying to please people, it's about trying to communicate with them.
Yeah, and I think it is a social act, and therefore implied in that, I think it is an ethical act to some degree.
Yes.
That there is an ethics
Very
to
good
writing.
point. Very good point. Yeah. So look, in that regard, you bring up ethics and you talk about, I mean, were you troubled by the sense that some of the people that you may have known, or the kinds of people that have had these kinds of experiences, might recognise themselves in this novel?
Sure.
From an ethical perspective, was that an issue for you?
Talk to some of them.
Yes.
I try not to keep great contact with most of them, because some of them are still involved in that life.
Sure. Okay.
I feel that's a danger to me.
Yes.
For want of a better way of putting it, where it touched on things which I had experienced with other people, I asked their permission.
Sure, of course. That's the way to do it, isn't it, from an ethical standpoint?
That's exactly right.
Yes.
But you can't do everything. People might read themselves. I can't remember everything. It was a fairly heady time. Well,
of course.
Honestly, there's bits of it missing that may have come out subconsciously in the
Yes.
book. So maybe somebody will recognise something in there that I didn't know I put in there, and feel aggrieved by that. All I can say is I did my best to honour the subjects.
Yes.
Whether that best is good enough or not, that's for them and for the world to decide. I mean, the idea that I can commit an ethical act on my own is not really true. Ethics is attached to a whole group of people. It's dependent on a whole group of people, and you might find out that the action where you did your best, in retrospect, wasn't quite good enough.
Yeah, look, absolutely. But as long as you're satisfied, you did your best. And then, look, if anyone's going to put anything out in the world, that's all you can do.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm satisfied that I did my best.
Well, okay, even if you're not, I mean, you can wrestle with yourself and your consciousness for so long. That's what I'm saying. But you can't regret it. You can't. You've got to keep moving forward.
I'm not a big regretter. Like, you
That's
can't
good to
really
hear.
do anything about the past.
So in regards to that, let's look forward to the future. I mean, where do you see yourself heading? So you've got a new collection of poetry coming out early next year.
Sure, yeah.
What else are you working on? What's in store for you?
I take on way too much, to be honest with you. I had this poetry collection finished before the novel was published.
Wow, okay.
And I was usually working on 2 or 3 things at the same time. So currently I'm doing another novel in chiastic structure, which is an ancient kind of poetic structure. That's my PhD thesis.
Okay.
The other thing I'm doing is a short story collection. And I was talking to Mel Hall about doing a kind of satirical novel together, collaboration.
Wow.
I only recently started collaborating with people. I had a piece in Rabbit with Scott Patrick Mitchell and Madison Godfrey, which I'm really proud of.
That's really interesting, that whole idea of a collaborative practice as well, which a lot of people aren't necessarily cognizant of.
When I describe myself as, learning in solitude, it's very much true. I didn't work with anybody. Didn't have networks or anything like that. I was just locked in a house writing constantly. It's sort of coming up to air and working with those 2 people who are my great friends. I was surprised how well it came out. I'm really proud of that piece.
Fantastic.
And we all had like an equal contribution.
Yes.
There's kind of a because they're both non-binary poets. There was a kind of flexibility of gender and theme and subject that was really, really freeing to be involved with. And I absolutely loved it. So I'm starting to like bringing those other voices into my work, so maybe some collaborations in the future. I'm also working on a short story collection, and then after that I've got the next novel planned. Which is,
wow, so you've definitely always got the next thing.
Well, yeah,
and also working on things simultaneously.
That's
as well.
right, and I've started a file for my next poetry collection because I'm basically always writing poetry.
Of course.
It's pointless not to put the good ones into a file.
100%.
And try and get another collection out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's made it easier publishing novels.
Yeah.
To publish poetry.
Sure.
It's a brutal trade, and people sometimes won't look at your stuff no matter what the quality of it is if you haven't, got that traction. And it was so much easier to publish my poetry collection.
Well, once you'd had the novel out and it achieved the recognition that it did.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can see that. And look, in fact, that was going to be probably my last question, which is, the writing life. I mean, it's pretty tough, isn't it?
It is,
in general. Let's face it. I mean, you've partly answered the question in terms of how much easier it was to get your poetry out there. But beyond that, I mean, presumably you've got to support yourself in other ways. You can't. Very few people can live off their writing.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
So how do you manage to balance those competing needs on your time between the creative and the very practical, I've got to eat, side of your life?
Work constantly, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that.
No, but it is hard because don't you feel like you're just constantly torn in different directions and distracted and.
Yeah. I'm doing a PhD at the moment, which.
Yes. Well, that in a way, it's probably a third element. If you're doing some work and then you're working on your poetry and then you're doing a PhD as well.
It's true, but it has provided me like a tremendous privilege.
Yes.
Which is 3 years of funding.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. That enables you...
A small wage, but some kind of wage.
Indeed.
Which enables me to... which has enabled me to work on these two other projects as well, to get them out. And to work on my academic life. After that, I don't know so much about working in academia. I guess I'm going to try and sustain myself with some kind of part-time work. I used to do physical labour, so I don't know that the writing life is any tougher than that. Every industry has its quirks and politics and setbacks. The world is not a meritocracy. It's not built like that. So I guess I'm just philosophical about it. The idea of sustaining yourself as an artist is what makes me happy. So I guess I'll just find a way and continue to do it.
Oh, look, it's interesting you bring up physical work too, because I've often had a lot of labouring jobs throughout my life, and you can sort of hate it at the time, but then you think it's extraordinary experience for your writing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of writers don't have the privilege of working on a building site or in a shearing shed.
Very true.
And they can't really communicate that kind of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I ended up looking at it as a positive rather than a negative.
It has been true. It has been good for my writing, my sense of characterisation.
Yes, indeed.
Certainly good for talking in a non-patronising way about the class that I write
Exactly
about.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
And in that kind of Shakespearean way, to capture the tones, to capture the accents, to capture the vernacular. It's great for that.
It almost becomes research, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Field research.
In a way it does, but in another way it's been absolutely terrible for my back.
Yes, indeed. I know, I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, Alan, so where can we get the book? I mean, it's published by Transitland, is that right?
Lounge,
Yes,
that's
indeed.
right.
Okay.
Just go to the website.
All good bookshops and on the website as well?
Yeah, they got New South distribution, so you can get it through all the regular book outlets, Dymocks or whatever. Not in Big W yet. I would love to be in Big W. I see like Cialcas books in Big W. You've done it, Cialcas. You got it in Big W. That's
you've made it.
Yeah,
That's the
that book he wrote, 7.5, was kind of about not having to be a vet nurse anymore.
Yes, sure, yes.
Yeah, which I mean, I think that's great. Like, really, I think it's great that he worked as a vet nurse for so long.
Exactly. Partly for the reasons we've just talked about as well.
And I think it's good that he gets to, spend his retirement not working as a vet nurse.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, having received after all that hard work. I read Loaded way back when it first came out and thought it was just a cracking novel. I'm glad to see him move from that to this point. You know, whether that's great for his writing or not is another question, but for him personally, I think that's good, and I'd like to think there's maybe that for me as well.
Follow that trajectory.
Yeah,
yes.
I don't know. No, I'd sort of plan to give up writing one day. Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
I think I'll run out of things to say eventually, and I think the absolute worst thing to read is a book by an author who's run out of things to say.
Who's got nothing to say, and my God, there are a lot out there that should never have been published.
I know, especially if their previous books were good, and you've become a fan, and you get to that point where they've run out of things to say, and you get that book. There's nobody else who can let you down quite so much as even bands do it as well. You know, keep on trying to go just for the sake of being a musician, just for the sake of being an author. It's not. I don't feel like it's a divine vocation that I have to live up to every minute. I think it's something that if I run out of ideas, if I run out of
while you've got something
to
say, you'll keep saying it.
Yeah,
you haven't,
exactly.
That's it. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Well, look, I've actually run out of things to say, so except for saying goodbye and thanking you for being on Pod Street. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Will. That was a great chat.